Okay, juniors, this is it. Chapter 9 of The Great Gatsby, and it is our last chapter. So we're going to see the final few moments. I think in my notes I had us going through chapter 10, and there's no such thing. So we'll finish up today. Now, I got to be honest with you. With the exception of the last 2 pages, I find this chapter to be quite anticlimactic, which I guess is the way it should be. But I feel like it's not as strong a writing in many cases. There's some, important things that happen, and there's a few great lines. It would probably be like right ahead. If it wasn't for the last few pages, this would probably be right ahead of chapter 2. This would be like my next to least favorite chapter, just because I feel like it just kind of feels like tying up the loose ends was a little awkward. So let's talk about that. As the last chapter ended, we had Gatsby and George Wilson both dead. George on the lawn, Gatsby dead in the pool. So now we pick up with legal proceedings as the police arrive to try to figure out what's happened. Obviously, they're going to pretty great lengths to figure out what happened because Gatsby has some connections with the police commissioner, and also because, Gatsby's a rich guy, and they care when rich people die. Now, the actual people don't, sadly, and we're going to look at that in a minute, but the police officers do. We also get that now George is kind of reframed as not a grieving husband who's lost his wife and been tricked into killing Gatsby, but as some sort of psychopath who has that they really can't understand why he decided to lash out at Gatsby. It's really uncomfortable with what happened to him. And of course, no one goes to look for the actual answers because, George is poor, so they just don't really care, which is, I hate that that's the way that goes. But, welcome to how things work. So, in fact, what's her name? Myrtle's sister, Catherine, even lies about it, doesn't even mention anything. She just, paints George in a bad light. And, he's going to go down, if this was real, historically as a really bad guy. So at this point, though, like I said, the police may care about finding out who killed Gatsby, but the people themselves don't. I mean, the gossip is a big deal. Did you hear about that big famous guy that threw all the parties, how he ended up shot? But actually caring about him and the grieving process, that's just non-existent, and all that's left to Nick. He tries to reach out to some of the other people, Tom and Daisy. He reaches out to them. They can't be found. Wolfsheim can't be found. Later, Wolfsheim's going to make up some excuse about how he has to distance himself from this, but you can't get him involved. Any of Gatsby's acquaintances that call seem uninterested, whether it's his business acquaintances or personal ones. No one seems to care a thing about this. And we begin to see how little people really did know him or give any kind of concern for him. He is the guy they showed up to for parties, and they enjoyed that part. But beyond that, Gatsby's not important to anyone. So, all these years he's fought to, become a nobody, not to be a nobody, and here he is in death. What is he? He's a nobody. That's the irony of how this ends, to be honest with you. We do eventually get someone who's concerned about Gatsby. His father, Henry Gatz, shows up. He wasn't even able to be contacted by Nick because, of course, Gatsby lied about who his family was, so Nick had no way to contact them. His dad hears about it through the papers and shows up. And, you can see he's heartbroken. But really, you can also see that he doesn't know about what his son has become. His image of him is what a lot of parents do. It's that image of, when they were younger, and you just kind of live with that and don't realize that your kids become actual, adults and go off in their own directions and have their own problems. And he's still picturing him as a kid. Not a young kid, but still a younger person. Gatsby, Nick asks if they want to bury Gatsby out west where he's from, and the dad says no, he needs to be buried here in the east. This is where he thrived, and for the first time that I can remember, and granted I could be wrong, but I don't think I am, one of you asked me the other day, I think it was Joe Williams asked me if there's any point that great and the words great and Gatsby are combined, and you don't get them together, but here's the reference to the word great, all right? This is the father talking. If he'd have lived, he'd have been a great man, a man like James J. Hill. He'd have helped build up the country. So you get that if he had lived, he would have been a great man. So that, in fact, we can do a lot with that sentence. We can talk about how, he would have been great. He's not great in this instance. And honestly, one of the questions, I'll give you a heads up for those of you who watch the video, one of your questions on the test is, would we consider him great or not? And you can have your opinions to that. I have mine for sure. disturbing thing to me, we had met, if you were reading, I don't know if it showed up in the movie, but if you were reading, we met a guy named Klipspringer who has been basically living at Gatsby's free of charge. He just showed up and kind of never left. So he's been living off of Gatsby for a while now, and he's moved on, and he's calling and finds out, Nick tries to talk him into coming to the funeral because Nick just wants some people there so Gatsby feels important when he's at the funeral. I realize Gatsby's dead, but, perceiving that Gatsby can look down from heaven and see it, or, up. Hey, my T's crooked, isn't it? Let's fix that. Depending on where Gatsby is. But he's hoping he can see the funeral and realize that Nick came through for him in the end. But Klipspringer's like, no, I can't do it. I've got people who expect me for some event. Could you mail my shoes to me? And of course, not Gatsby, Nick hangs up on him mid-thing, because at this point, Nick's furious, as he should be. For a guy who, thousands, if not tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people, have come and, drank his free liquor and indulged in breaking things in his house, now he can't even get a single one of them to show up to just see this man off. Just common human decency would be, even if you don't really know him, show up. We get Wolfsheim. Wolfsheim talks about how it's important to, recognize people when they're alive and not worry so much about their when they die, which is sad, but what a lot of us do. And then Gatsby's dad breaks out this little book that shows who Gatsby was when he was growing up. He's got this, his day mapped out, how everything he wants to do and to improve himself. You can see Gatsby had the potential to be a really important person if he just hadn't gotten his dream corrupted by dealing with Daisy. But he did. And that's not Daisy's fault. It's purely Gatsby's fault. But because of the way society corrupted his dream and destroyed it for him, all of this potential is lost. Okay, we see the waiting at the house before they begin the funeral procession, hoping some people will show up, but no one does. It's raining outside. There's no one there, and this is just depression. I mean, such a sad scene for a man who, despite his flaws, was an interesting person, and just no one seems to care about him. At the funeral, this odd character that we saw in the library shows up, Owl Eyes, and he shows up at the funeral and seems to be there to point out the obvious, how sad the situation is, considering how many people used to show up at Gatsby's house, but now no one will show up for his funeral. How much they cared about him in his life, but not at all in his death. And we also get the note that during the funeral, Daisy didn't even send a letter, flowers, nothing. She obviously doesn't care. There's a beautiful passage, and there's several in here. Like I said, some of the writing is really strong. One of them is found on page 175 for me. And this is a section. There's a whole section here, so I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs, so bear with me. It says, one of my most vivid memories is of coming back west from prep school and later from college at Christmas time. Those who went farther than Chicago would gather in the old dim Union Station at 6 o'clock of a December evening with a few Chicago friends already caught up in their own holiday gaieties to bid them a hasty goodbye. I remember the fur coats of the girls returning from Miss This or That's, and the chatter of frozen breath and the hands waving overhead as we caught sight of old acquaintances, and the matchings of invitations. Are you going to the Ordways, the Hershey's, the Schultz's? And then the long green tickets clasped tight in our gloved hands. And last, the murky yellow cars at the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, looking cheerful as Christmas itself on the tracks besides the gate. When we pulled out into the winter night and the real snow, our snow, began to stretch out beside us and twinkle against the windows, and the dim lights of small Wisconsin stations moved by, a sharp, wild brace came suddenly into the air. We drew in deep breaths of it as if we walked back from dinner through the cold vestibules, unutterably aware of our identity within this country for one strange hour before we melted indistinguishably into it again. That's my Middle West. Not the wheat or the prairies or the lost Swede towns, but the thrilling returning trains of my youth, and the street lamps and sleigh bells in the frosty dark and the shadows of holly wreaths thrown by lighted windows on the snow. I am part of that. A little solemn with the feel of those long winters, a little complacent from growing up in the Caraway house in a city where dwellings are still called through decades by a family's name. I see now that this has been a story of the West after all. Tom and Gatsby, Daisy and Jordan, and I were all Westerners, and perhaps we possessed some deficiency in common which made us subtly unadaptable to Eastern life. I mean, what a powerful passage of description. When people act like descriptive passages are just things to skip through, you're missing out, because that is just, no one can describe it that way. Guys, I have never lived in the Midwest. Closest I came was we lived in the Kentucky-Ohio border. That's kind of that area, but I was there for such a short time. I don't have memories there. But reading this, I feel like I was there. It makes me feel all the great feelings I get when I think about Christmas and what I think Christmas should be, which is, friends and snow and all of that, and that is such a powerful thing. There's no important lines except the very last one, and there's no plot at all, but it just is one of the most amazing parts of the book to me. And once you begin to see writing as an art form and not as something you're forced to deal with or do, you will begin to see that, how beautiful words can truly be, guys. And I mean it. Of course, there at the end, we get the idea that the East has this way to poison people. And the East doesn't just mean the East of the country. Remember, it's also that old money ideal of the East. The East seems to represent, think about even in our world today, East, you have the, New York, you have Boston, Chicago, all those old cities that have a major impact on our country. And then on the West, you have San Francisco and Los Angeles, the glitzy, glamorous places. And that's still an attitude. Think about, people used to talk about making their fortune, they were going to go out West. This image is still of that. People dream constantly of moving out West and becoming stars. It's just, this is still part of our American culture. All right. The East, Nick points out immediately after that, the East has now become haunted for him. I mean, he is now no longer happy. That not prejudice, that hatred, no one's hatred is probably too strong of a word, that distaste for the wealthy and everything that it represents, we see that show up here. So he decides to leave. First thing he has to do, though, is break up with Jordan, which I'm not sure these two ever were really together, but they seem to be just going through with the motions because that's what you do. The bad driver thing comes back, though. Remember, we talked about that. He said, you said a bad driver was only safe until she met another bad driver? Well, I met another bad driver, didn't I? I mean, it was careless of me to make such a wrong guess. I thought you were rather an honest, straightforward person. I thought it was your secret pride. Now, that's Jordan. I think I said Daisy a minute ago, not Daisy. That's Jordan. Jordan's talking to Nick. And listen to Nick's response. This is so not Nick. He says, I'm 30, I said. I'm 5 years too old to lie to myself and call it honor. Look at how jaded this man has become, and you know what? That's the way he should be at this point. He has seen, but when no one shows up at Gatsby's funeral, he realizes just how garbage people truly are. You're looking at the upper class who should be the best of us, and they're just not. They have the resources to be the best of us, and they have the upbringing and the education to be the best of us, and yet they're the worst of us in this book. And not Gatsby, and Nick realizes that. All right. Also, at this point, a few paragraphs later, he runs into Tom, and look how he handles Tom. I mean, at this point, Nick finally seems to be finding his big boy pants. He comes across Tom. Tom comes over and says, suddenly he saw me and walked back, holding out his hand. What's the matter, Nick? Do you object to shaking my hand or shaking hands with me? Yes, you know what I think of you. You're crazy, Nick, he said quickly. Crazy as, I don't know what's the matter with you. So, it's like Tom's taken aback. Who would have the guts to stand up to him? Well, Nick's not going to put up with it. And Nick goes on to ask, hey, what did you say to Wilson after that murder? And we kind of get the idea that Tom's the one who put him on Gatsby. Now, there's a little bit of debate about whether Tom knows that it was Daisy that hit Myrtle or not, okay? But regardless of either way, he either deliberately, framed Gatsby, or he still put this killer on Gatsby regardless. He wanted Gatsby to die in this situation. And Nick knows that, and Nick has no respect for him now and his behavior. Overall, and Tom tries to get some sympathy about how bad he felt about Myrtle's death and how much he cared about her. But at this point, that's not the way you save your reputation here. And Nick has nothing to say with him. And listen to how Nick ends that situation. He says, they were careless people. Remember, we just saw that careless thing with Jordan. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made. That is biting criticism. He's saying, these people, all they do is break stuff, destroy it, and leave it for other people to clean up. And they hide in their money. Nick has nothing but disdain for the wealthy at this point. And I think that's a little bit of Fitzgerald coming out in him. And I think there's something to discuss there, which we will probably tackle in class for sure. All right? Okay, then we see kind of a poignant scene as like a lone car drives up to Gatsby's house and then pulls away after it realizes the party's gone. This guy doesn't even know that Gatsby's dead. That's how little they truly care. They just know that there used to be parties at this house. And then, guys, man, if there is ever lines in literature that I just absolutely adore, it is these last, let's see, 3.5 paragraphs. This to me is the peak of writing. I don't think there's anything that's been produced before or after that can touch this section, and it gives me chills still after I've read it. I've read this book probably anywhere from 12 to 15 times, and it still really, really hits me. I love this passage. So let me read it to you. Says, I became aware of the old island here that flowered once for Dutch sailors' eyes, a fresh, green breast of the New World. Its vanished trees, the trees that had made way for Gatsby's house, had once pandered in whispers to the last and greatest of all of human dreams. For a transitory, enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent, compelled into an aesthetic contemplation he neither understood nor desired, face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. And as I sat there brooding on the old, unknown world, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. He had come a long way to this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. He did not know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch out our arms farther, and one fine morning, and then it trails off, and then you get the last lines. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. And that's the ending. And just reading it, I'm getting chill bumps, okay? I mean, it's this idea that Gatsby was reaching for a dream that had been gone for years. It was way back in 5 years before when him and Daisy first were together, and now that's gone. And he says, but that doesn't stop us. Even though we know we can't reach our dreams, we keep going. And he says, in one fine morning, and then it trails off. It's like, what's going to happen? And then he says the famous line about, so we beat on, boats against the current, borne ceaselessly back into the past. The idea here that our past is going to forever hold us to, it's going to mark us in many ways, and no matter how hard we fight it, like Gatsby fighting who his parents were, or Gatsby fighting the fact that it doesn't matter that he's rich now, he was poor once. I mean, our past is always going to be a part of us. We always seem to fight it instead of accepting it and becoming better than that. So while some people may think this ends on somewhat of a pessimistic note, I don't think it does. I think we need to learn that our past is what has helped us become what we are today. Without these things, without the struggles, without the positives, we don't turn into the person we are, and we should relish those. I mean, we should revel in those, not relish. We should revel in those in our past and understand how we can use it to become make a better tomorrow. And Gatsby, had potential to make such a powerful tomorrow instead of what he did do. All right, which was, be obsessed with something he could never reach and then die. We need to be better. We need to, truly be able to earn the term great, which, in my opinion, he never did. So, well, guys, that's the end of it. My favorite book. You've gotten a chance to, go through it with me. Hopefully you read it. Hopefully the movie wasn't your only experience, although the movie's terrific, and I'm not going to lie, I really enjoy it. But I hope that if you didn't read the book, I hope at some point in your life you pick this up and give it another shot and realize the power of of words and of how amazing F. Scott Fitzgerald is as a writer. Well, guys, thank you for your time, and we're going to end this, and I'll be back with you guys for some other material as we start to look at these early writings. We're going to look at a lot of early, pre-Revolutionary War writings and see what the American dream initially began as for some of these people who first came here. All right? Okay, well, thank you again for taking this journey with me.